just testing it.
Yep, they look good. So we are ready to go whenever you are.
All right. Well, welcome. Good to see some folks coming in here. Welcome, Dr. McGeehee. I appreciate your willingness to do this, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say today. I'm Zach Hawkins, Director of Indian Education for All here at the Office of Public Instruction. And I'm overseeing some of the language revitalization efforts of Mr. Jay Eagleman, of which this is a piece. And so we're excited to have you all here today and hope you get a lot out of this. Please remember there will be a link for the sign-in sheet for renewal units for those of us joining us, and also an evaluation so we can continue to make these presentations better. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Eagleman.
Bonjour, ane nios. Asani Winjing Nindunjabam, Jay Eagleman, Nitsika, son. So I want to welcome everybody. I see there's people joining, and I want to thank you, Dr. McGeehee, for educating our group. I want to thank the kind superintendent for authorizing this through the Office of Public Instruction. And just to make a short comment, you know, Zach, you mentioned the Indian Education Division for OPI. All of the team members from OPI, you know, there is a concerted effort on OPI's part to bring tribal language revitalization to the forefront of, you know, our agenda. So I really appreciate your time, appreciate everybody's time, and just in the sake of honoring everybody's time, we're going to go an hour or so. And I want to have you all understand that at the end of the presentation period, we've scheduled some time for some questions. So feel free. And once again, Anin, Dr. McGeehee, Kawepingain.
Miigwech Jay, Muju Anishinaabe Migo Nina Tumda, Gagigadoyan, Ingikagweji Megudabi, Dajindamano, Anishinaabemowin, Ojibwe, Asian Akadig, Asia Bimine Jatamang, Nina Windoma, Wayne Jiang. So good morning. I believe it's still morning over there. We just hit noon here in my time zone at Odawaza Gaiganing. We're in the LCO time zone, or the Central time zone. So good to see everybody join. And Jay asked me to give this presentation to give you guys a little awareness on what's going on with Ojibwe country, Ojibwe country, if you will. And I put together some slides so you won't have to look at me the whole time. Hey, I know it's always awkward when we can, when you're seen, but you can't see who's seeing you. So you don't have to look at me. You can look at my pictures. So in Anishinaabemowin, we say the Biajegi we magak gegaga when sing. And to us, that means when it comes back home, that which was almost lost. And we have a huge language revitalization effort going on in my neck of the woods over here. So my English name is Michael Sullivan. My Anishinaabe name, my Ojibwe name given to me when I was a little baby through our naming ceremony tradition here is McGeehee. And so I'm named after the bald eagle in our local variety of Ojibwe. So that's my Anishinaabe name. I'm a trained linguist, so I have my advanced degrees and masters and PhDs are in linguistics. So that's kind of my educational background. In Ojibwe culture, in Ojibwe communities, we have a clan system that we're born into, and we inherit our due dame, we say, from our father's side. So for me, my father was a non-Indian. My father was a Chamokaman. And our local teaching here is if you have a non-Indian father, then you're spiritually adopted into the Eagle clan. So a lot of us half-breeds, if you will, we're Eagle clan members. And each of the clans has a sort of role to play in traditional Anishinaabe society. So and it's sort of one of our culturally appropriate ways of introducing ourselves is to tell people what Anishinaabe name is and what clan we belong to, because it's our clan, our duodam, we say, that sort of identifies each other as relatives. So we believe in we're spiritually related to people of the same clan, and there's spiritual taboos associated with mingling or intermarrying within your own clan. So we try to teach our kids what clan they belong to and adhere to some of those old cultural teachings that have been held in place in our area. So I'm from Odawazagaiganing, which is the Lakudere Ojibwe Reservation in northwestern Wisconsin. So we're about an hour south of Duluth, Minnesota, if anybody knows where Duluth is. And the big lake up here, Lake Superior, our big Ojibwe Gitchigami, we call it, is about an hour north of here. So we're kind of smack dab in between Duluth and Lake Superior, about an hour apart. And what else? So the Ojibwe territory is a huge territory. So aside from Cree, Cree is the only more widely spoken indigenous language in North America. Ojibwe is the second most widely spoken. And what I mean by widely spoken is covering the most territory traditionally, right? So just about everywhere Ojibwe's are, to the immediate north, you'll find Crees spread all the way from the East Coast all the way over to Alberta. So if you drop south, you'll typically run into the Ojibwe's after visiting the Crees. So within that sort of big Ojibwe language family exists various subgroups or dialect groupings, if you will. So the kind of Ojibwe that we speak in my neck of the woods, we call it Southwestern Ojibwe, is the sort of linguist title for our particular variety. We're very, very closely related to Potawatomi and Odawa. So in a lot of our more eastern communities, there's been a lot of Odawa and Potawatomi influence due to intermarriage and the relocation of different tribes and so forth. So Ojibwe is a big place and a really, really widely spoken language. I haven't been everywhere Ojibwe is spoken, so my PhD research was on dialect variation in this sort of territory here in the southwestern and a little bit of Saulteaux communities. I have worked with speakers up in Manitoba, and I've worked with speakers in the east in Ontario, Manitoulin Island. And I had the honor of meeting Jim Ochi last summer when I was in Great Falls, and he's from way up in Alberta, and he speaks Ojibwe and Cree. So I was kind of worried that we wouldn't be able to understand each other, being that we're from so far apart from one another. But we got along just good, we could talk, understand each other just fine. And he sounds like a lot of the elders that I worked with in this territory. So our government name is Chippewa, and even on the Rocky Boy designation, right? Chippewa Cree tribe. So that's the result of inconsistencies in spelling as a historical. We can trace the spelling of the word Ojibwe through the records, right? Going all the way back to the missionaries and the Jesuits. This original spelling of Ojibwe, if you look in the old documents, it was this right here, Otchippwa, to be pronounced Ojibwe, right? Ojibwe. About 10, 15 years later, the O starts to fall off in the spellings of traders and such. And when you hear the word pronounced, sometimes people that don't have a good ear won't hear the O. So it's like Ojibwe, Ojibwe, Ojibwe. So they started to write it Chipwe, Chipwe. Well, around early 1800s, the Y falls off the end of the word in the spelling. And so even though we read it today as Chippewa, it was originally supposed to be pronounced Chipwe, Chipwe, Ojibwe from Ojibwe. So that's where the word Chippewa comes from. It's a misnomer. It's incorrect. It's not a self-designation that we call ourselves. A lot of linguists and anthropologists have made classifications. Ojibwe is the variety spoken north of the Canadian border, and Chippewa is spoken south of the Canadian border, and those are all inaccurate. So I just like to share that with people. It's been a name that's long been rejected in our local community. People don't like the term Chippewa because we're Ojibwe and Anishinaabe. But that's pretty common everywhere, with different tribes and their names, and what the tribe calls themselves, of course, is most important for our purposes. So we got a long history of migration as a people, which is why we ended up all over the place throughout the sort of upper Midwest region of North America. So our origin story, we have an old traditional oral tradition about where we come from. And one of the local versions of that story is we originally migrated from the east coast, eastern seaboard down to St. Lawrence. And there was a prophecy that we were supposed to move west to where the food grows on top of the water. And so Anishinaabe people left the east and started heading west, looking for where the food grows on top of the water. And of course, we know that today is wild rice. So we just got done with our local wild rice season here in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Most people are wrapping up their rice camps now. So throughout the course of our history, not everybody made it to our present day locale. A lot of our relatives fell off the trek and settled communities way out in Quebec and all over here in Michigan. And they say one of the last stopping points where we were all still together with the Ojibwes, the Odawas, and the Potawatomis. We were what we call sister bands, or really closely related. One of the last stopping points we were all together was at Sault Ste. Marie, Bawating. From there, you had a whole constituency head north, and you had a whole constituency head south. And so a lot of our dialect historical sort of documentation and research that we do, we can pinpoint where we diverge from one another at Sault Ste. Marie. And a lot of folks came south, especially the Potawatomi and the Odawas. So my particular band, we settled here. Other people kept moving west. And when you move this way throughout Ojibwe country, the rice only gets better. Rice is really, really good in northern Minnesota. Even to this day, some of the most pristine wild rice beds left in the world are in this territory right here. So people kind of made their way around, and this was prior to a reservation period and settling in one particular locale. People were moving. We know Ojibwe people have been at Turtle Mountain since at least the early 1800s. There's documentation of Ojibwe's being that far west. And if you go through the historical record and you look at stuff, you'll know that the Ojibwe's that ended up in Montana and even Saskatchewan and Alberta often descended from what we know as the Pillager Band, who made their treaties with Red Lake and also on the Leech Lake Reservation. So a lot of older people that know about their history coming from the east here know that they likely came from the Pillager Band. So lots of different bands of Ojibwe. So Turtle Mountain was well established early 1800s, Rocky Boy more later in the century, early 1900s. And talking to that old man Jim Ochis, he's talked about his family leaving sometime 1860s in Minnesota. And I was telling Jay on a call earlier here that those are real turbulent times for the Anishinaabe people here in what we know as Minnesota and Wisconsin. Government was encroaching. They were after land cessions and wanted access to the timber and the minerals. And we entered into these series of treaty negotiations with the United States government that sort of guaranteed our homelands, protected our treaty rights, our harvesting rights, and established reservations in ceded territory. So we had all these negotiations going on and a lot of skirmishes breaking out. The Dakota War of 1862 was popping off down near present-day Twin Cities, Fort Snelling area, and Abraham Lincoln had just hung like 37 Dakotas in downtown Mankato. And so there was a war breaking out, and there was a chief named Buganagijik who came from northern Minnesota up here by Leech Lake, who was actually trying to motivate and encourage all these Ojibwe bands to join the Dakota and fight in the United States government. So during that particular time period, there was a lot of people heading west and getting away from the drama and the encroaching United States government. So that's how Ojibwe people ended up way out in your present day locale, Montana. And a lot of people didn't even stop there, right? We know people that came through Rocky Boy and settled in Saskatchewan and Alberta. So the Little Shell Band recently got their federal recognition. So they're another constituency from our group here. So that's sometimes, people that don't know any better or don't know the history or the story might wonder how Ojibwe in Rocky Boy is such a far flung from the rest of the sort of family. But that's kind of, you got to understand the history and the times that were in play. People were moving, fleeing. So I live in this community we call Odawza Gayagan, the Lakudere Ojibwe reservation. And I like to tell people that our community, the stage is set here for real full-scale language revitalization. So we have our own tribal school that serves K-12, and it was one of the first tribal schools BIA funded originally in the nation. And it was up the school year 1975, 1976 is when they launched LC Ojibwe School. We also have our own Head Start and early Head Start serving ages 0 to 5. These schools and situations are common on a lot of reservations. We have our own daycare center, Gainaway and Dawasong for little ones. And we have what many consider the shining pearl of the Ojibwe language revitalization movement. We have our Wadukadari Ojibwe Language Immersion School, which is currently K9. I got to update my slides. They started their first 9th grade class. The first crop of high schoolers started this year at Wadukadari. So they're currently K9 with plans to go K12 in the next 3 years. So in that school, 100% of your academic content is delivered through the medium of the Ojibwe language. So the language is the tool for instruction. So kids learn their science, math, reading, all that stuff in Ojibwe, with the exception of English class. So at 4th grade is when they introduce English class as a formal subject where children are concerned with reading and writing English and all the puzzles that exist there. So that's pretty cool. And that was my former place of work. I was at the Wadukadari Immersion School for about 7 years, working on the middle school expansion and middle school development prior to my coming here to our university. So I'm currently a university faculty here at the Res institution. We also have this school called the Kigikanoamading, which is a charter school for grades 6 through 12. And it's a place-based, science-based, project-based, outdoorsy sort of school where these kids harvest. And they're out in the woods. The woods is their classroom, or being on the water is their classroom, and they do all of our seasonal harvesting, and that's their curriculum. We also own and operate a Ojibwe radio station, WOJB 88.9 FM, streaming worldwide. So Tuesday nights are usually the best nights to tune in. That's when they have their powwow music and round dance music jamming throughout the res. And my place of work now, here we have our Lakudere Ojibwe University, which serves outreach sites in our territory. So we have neighboring reservations that are all within 2 hours from each other: Red Cliff, Bad River, Lac du Flambeau. So these are all the same bands that sign the same treaties, and sort of we're connected to them via kinship and language and culture and treaty rights and all that stuff. So we have outreach sites in those communities where we zoom out our classes too. Some of our instructors are in those sites zooming into us. So all of our programming here at the university is distance capable. So if you got language students interested out in Montana, they can apply here and enroll here without ever setting foot here. If they didn't have the opportunity to come here, they'd be able to zoom into our classes, which are in huge demand. We usually have waiting lists for the majority of our language class enrollments. So I want to direct you guys' attention on your own time. You can go explore MEAN. MEAN is the Midwest Indigenous Immersion Network. And I sit on the board for this organization. And what it is about is organizing and networking our current immersion professionals in our territory. So all these members here, these are all immersion schools, our immersion programs, and the map kind of shows where they're physically located. So Wadukadani is the one here, and that's the oldest and biggest, longest running one. And you got programs listed here that are sort of pre-K programs, early childhood programs, kindergarten pilot programs. and everything in between, right? Adult immersion programming. So I encourage you to visit their site. It's meanojibwe.org. Lots of resources on there, cool links to sites and videos and recordings, and just a magnificent effort underway. So the organization offers immersion professional developments for teachers, so meet and greets, mingling sessions, social stuff as well. So real cool. And we even got one of our partner organizations from Ontario at Walpole Island. So we're now a international language network, if you buy into that kind of thing. So myself as a language user, I'm a L2. I'm a second language speaker. So I acquired Ojibwe young, but I wasn't a kid. I was a young man when I started to get serious, and we had language classes, of course, as kids, which weren't too effective. But I've been exposed to Ojibwe for a long time. Just about everybody 60 and older, when I was a kid, everybody 60 and older spoke Ojibwe around here. So it wasn't uncommon to hear Ojibwe at the store or the tribal office or around the kitchen table when grandparents and older folks were visited. So we were exposed to it, but nobody spoke Ojibwe to us. We had to go out of our way to pick it up, kind of thing, and had to learn. So I always like to include and give my love and my respect to all my teachers, because I've had so many. They never ever fit on a one slide, but I always like to point out the significant ones who really had a hand in crafting my Ojibwe development. So this is Clara Beebe here, this lady in the top right corner. She was an Ojibwe elder who oversaw all the teaching of Ojibwe here at our local college, our tribal college. And she sat in every single class for years and made sure the teachers were keeping on track. And she was a great support to me when I was first started to get serious. This guy right here, that's Badwewa Dunibun. That's Eddie Benton Benet. So he's was a spiritual leader for our people. He ran the Three Fires Madewan Lodge, and he was from here. So he was one elder. I always ask questions of, a lot of good stuff, a lot of local stuff, a lot of stuff that only he knew. He outlived a lot of his peers. So we had Eddie up until about 3-4 years ago. He passed away on us. This is John Nichols. He's the Dumbledore of the Ojibwe language. He's the head wizard in charge. He's the one who makes our dictionaries and grammar stuff. He's been recording Ojibwe elders since the 1960s, and he's in his 80s now. He's retired, and he's still managing and editing the Ojibwe People's Dictionary, which is an online site with audio. If we got time at the end, I can give you a little show and tell of the dictionary. This is Jean Bun. So she was one of the founders and the heartbeat backbone to the Wadukadading Ojibwe School. So she was one of the ones who started our immersion school. This one here is Nancy Jones. She's from the Border Lakes region of Ontario. Nigigunsaminakaning is her home village. She's who I would say is the queen of the Ojibwe nation. She's the treasure chest of knowledge. She at one point had the Canadian record for fastest time skinning a beaver. And she was 19 years old when she set that record. So she was raised in the bush, lives in the bush, and still knows the bush very well. So she's one sought after old lady right there. Guy in the headdress is Bajikibun. He was my great uncle, and he was my first elder to really sit down with me and start working with me on Ojibwe before I was ever trained or knew what I was doing. These guys here, that's Keller Papp. He's one of the founders of the immersion school, and he's the first young guy I ever seen speak our language. And that's Mick. He was one of my main elders, one of my main teachers. And this photo was taken at a storytelling session. We had just got done telling our wintertime legends. This old man here is Misquanaquad. That's Eugene Stilldays from the Panema village on northern side of Red Lake Reservation. And he's the main voice of the Ojibwe People's Dictionary. We lost Eugene to COVID probably about 3 years ago. And then this guy's Obazan, Lee Staples. He's an author of many, many publications, books, but he's another spiritual leader. He comes from the community of Ojibwe in Minnesota. This is Maji Gwineash. He's from Ontario. Gordon Jourdain is his English name, and he holds a doctorate in education. He's a first language speaker from Lac La Croix, and phenomenal speaker. And I just went golfing with him a couple weeks ago and got about 6 pages of terms to talk for golf and how to talk about the course and the way the ball flies and the way so this guy is a treasure chest of sort of contemporary and traditional Anishinaabe knowledge. And these kids right here is the first graduating 8th grade class of the Wadukadani school. So those kids all speak our language. They're all juniors in high school now. So they were the first class to ever make it through 8th grade. And they all speak really, really excellent Ojibwe. So I tell people, you know, Jay asked me to speak a little bit about like the links that people have to go through to learn a language like Ojibwe or any indigenous language that's endangered, and access is a real issue, right? So for most of our people, we have the desire to learn our tribal language. Many of us don't have access to it, or many of us don't know how to get started or what we can do. So what I tell people, don't get yourself in the deep end right away, right? Ease yourself in. And I had banged my head against a brick wall for about 9 months one time. I couldn't make sense of anything. I was just starting out, getting serious about learning. I went and saw my great uncle Bijikibun, the one that was wearing the headdress in the picture, and I was kind of expressing to him my frustration. And he said, you know what you got to do, Mike? He said, you got to take your tobacco out and you got to ask for it. And he said, if you do that on a regular basis, he said, things will work out for you. It'll get easier. That money will notice you and it'll take pity on you. And I started to do that. You know, I'd take my tobacco out and I'd say a prayer and I'd pray that, you know, language could come to me and I could have an easy time with it. And before too long, man, everything started to click and stuff started to happen in my life that was beyond coincidence. You know, as Anishinaabe people, we're a spiritually minded people. So we don't really believe in the term coincidence. You know, everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. And so it's a spiritual journey, you know, reconnecting to your language and whatever your local tribal tradition is. You know, I encourage you to adhere to that because there's so much power and so much energy behind that that'll take you anywhere. And of course, as language learners, we have to start with vocabulary, right? We have to build up our own little base set of words, and we're not going to get far unless we have a vocabulary. So a lot of people like to do labels and such, right? Well, they'll label their home, the door, the table, the chair, whatever. They'll name everything, and that's where they'll start. And that's okay. That's a good place to start. One thing we know about our languages, though, is knowing the names of nouns won't get us very far, because our language is what we call a verb-based language, right? Verbs dominate the discourse. So pretty soon they rip off those labels and they put up new labels, the ones that say like shut the door or open the door or sit in the chair. They'll transform their labeling system to include verbs, or I shut the door, will you shut the door, stuff like that. Common expressions, you know, common salutations, things to say that are funny, things to say at the right time. Those are all the first things I encourage language learners to explore and master, you know, how to say funny stuff, how to come up with something smart alecky. Somebody asks you how you're doing, you know, come up with something that's a little off the cuff and different from everything else. Conversational exchanges, you know, like survival skills in your target language. So once you got a little bit of vocabulary under your belt, then start working on phrases you can use for eliciting language and asking for repetition, telling people you don't understand, like being able to navigate the Ojibwe speaking space, or navigate whatever target language it is, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be Ojibwe, but whatever language is you're working on, developing your own survival skills in that language so you can start leaving English out. Because realistically, your expedited path to language learning will only involve English for a little while if you do it right. And after a while, you'll be moving beyond English. You won't need English after a while once you get in there. So having a group of people, of course, helps. You know, if you have a group of people, somebody you could lean on, study buddies, peer support, knowing people that have acquired the language as a L2 helps too, because they can give you lots of pointers on study tips and things to watch out for. I tell everybody in Ojibwe country, you have to have thick skin to learn our language. You have to, man, because sometimes our elders can be rugged. Sometimes our fellow learners can be rugged, you know, and everybody's just crab in the bucket kind of thing. Everybody's an expert, you know, when it comes to language. So you got to be able to take criticism, and you got to be able to sort of let it roll off. You know, thin-skinned, sensitive language learners usually don't arrive at the day where they're good functional speakers. You kind of got to toughen up a little bit. Sometimes the elders might even say things that discourage you. But you got to be proactive. You got to take control of your own language learning. Nobody's going to give it to you. There's no grant that's going to solve your problem. There's no federal program or state program that's going to solve your problem. It's the sort of the will of the people. That's what's going to save our languages. And how we do that is taking our own responsibility, our own accountability for what we're doing about our own language, not what the council is going to do for us, but what we're going to do about our language. And typically how that works is people will dedicate themselves to learning our language. And by using it and being visible, using our language, that sort of sets off the wildfire and builds up other people's motivation. People need to be inspired. Like I said before, I never saw any young person speak our language until I was about 21 years old. I saw the first young person I ever saw in my life speak our language. Prior to that, our language was a language of the old people. I only ever heard old people use Ojibwe until I was in my 20s already. You got to have access to the language, right? You got to have access to where it's used. So that can be a language center, that can be a language table, that can be anywhere. Can be a community, right? We have a community north of here called Obashing, Panema, Minnesota. And if you go there, you can still sit at the elderly nutrition center and eat lunch with all these elders that speak our language. Like there's a good population still left of elders at Obashing. And the fastest, most expedited path to language acquisition, of course, is the demand and the requirement to use it, which is why our language immersion folks typically progress 3-4 times as fast as somebody who doesn't work in immersion. I know a lot of Ojibwe learners who have been learners for 20 plus years, and I've seen immersion people come in, 19, 20 years old, pick up the language in about 2 years, they're like eons beyond these people that have been at it for 20 years. But that demand, that requirement, that's where it happens fast, right? If you got sent over to Korea, for instance, you could pick up Korean a lot quicker just by being there and being exposed to it. There's lots of cool resources out there for learning Ojibwe, and I apologize for our non-Ojibwe readers. Most of my notes in here are to keep myself on track what to talk about. I want to make sure I leave a little time for questions. But I used to carry around these little notebooks, right? And in these notebooks were everything I wanted to know how to say. So as I moved throughout my day, I would write stuff down, right? If I was brushing my hair, damn, I don't even know how to say that. So I put it in my notebook. How do you brush your hair? How do I talk about brushing my hair? Or maybe I was tying my shoes. Damn, I don't even know how to say I'm tying my shoes in Ojibwe. So I'd write that down in my little notebook. When I got around elders and when I got around other people who were more proficient than I was, then I'd start to fill in my gaps, right? How do you say brush your hair? How do you say tie your shoes? That kind of stuff. And then in the back of the notebook, I would write down all the Ojibwe words that I had heard or I had read or I saw somewhere, maybe on signage or something. But I'd write down all the Ojibwe words that I didn't know what they meant. So I'd hear words and I'd write them down in the back of my book. And then when I got around elders or people who knew more than me, then I could fill in my gaps. And I did that for years. I got shoe boxes of those little notebooks. I always had one on me because I always think you got to be proactive. If you sit around and wait for it, it's never going to happen. We got all these cool resources out, books that come with audio. Birch Bark Books is a great resource for Ojibwe language materials. They are a giant powerhouse in the distribution of Ojibwe materials, and they're out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. So if you were to just Google Birch Bark Books, you'd find their site. Cool place to visit, really awesome bookstore in Minneapolis. So, but Birch Bark Books put on all these phrase books in the 80s and 90s. These came out and they include CDs like phrase books, right? So when you listen to the CD, there'll be a non-Indian voice saying, when I get up in the morning, and then this old man will come on, Onishkaya and Gigijib, say it in Ojibwe. I get dressed, Nabiza Kornae. He just goes through like this whole sequence, and it's called, this one particular series is called Traveling with Ojibwe, and it comes with 6 CDs. So it has everything in there from like checking into a hotel room to ordering from a restaurant, and just really, really cool phrase book that comes with the audio. And when I was a undergrad, really gung ho about learning Ojibwe, I had an iPod when those iPods were on a classic. I had like 280 gigs, and I put all that audio on there. I had hundreds of hours of Ojibwe audio on my iPod, and I just walk around campus reprogramming myself, listening to stuff that I didn't even understand yet, but I just wanted that sound, right? I wanted the rhythm, I wanted the tune of our language, my ears to get familiar with that. So I was kind of, a psycho language learner, real crazy. But that's almost what you got to take that's almost what it takes now with endangered language revitalization. You got to be super duper proactive and energetic, motivated. What else here? So I mentioned this little target area here on the map is where I kind of like specialize with my dialect research studies I was doing and figuring out what was relevant for Ojibwe. And we got all these little minuscule features that may vary from here to there, and it's not really that big of a deal, but it's one of the things that sets people apart or really creates a lot of tension and confrontation if there isn't anybody around who can explain stuff, So I thought that by learning what the dialect differences were from village to village, community to community, territory to territory, then I could be a better assistance for folks like you guys way out in Montana when it comes to, well, what particular variety of Ojibwe do you teach? What particular variety of Ojibwe would people want to learn there? So I got a little bit of that background there. And when I was a graduate student, we put together the Ojibwe People's Dictionary. So I got hired to be a research assistant, and my job was to go around and record anybody I could find and get all the words, sentences, stories, songs, whatever they were willing to record. And I had a budget, and that's what I did. I traveled all around Ojibwe country, and I recorded people, and I brought it back, transcribed it, and put it up online for the dictionary project. Now, one thing that comes with this sort of spiritual mindset of being a language learner usually draws you into spiritual spaces and what we call Indujia Semakade and Anishinaabe, or places where we offer tobacco. So we got lots of ceremonies in our territory. We have a big drum societies that exist on many of our reservations, and we got those drums out of a sort of peace offering from the Dakota when we were still at war with the Dakota people. They gave us our first ceremonial big drums. And those original drums were copied and shared throughout Ojibwe territory. So we have a strong dance tradition in this territory where our drums here at Lakudere, Odawazagaining, they use our drums 4 times a year. We have 2 of those ceremonial drums here. I sit on another drum society at Ojibwe, and that one's 2 times a year. They use that one in the spring and fall. Then I sit on another one at Bad River, which is north of here, and that drum is used twice a year. So lots of drum activity, especially in the spring and fall. Just about every weekend, if you ever wanted to visit over here, just about every weekend we have our big drum ceremonies going on somewhere in the spring and the fall time. We also have active Madewin lodges. So our Madewin way of life, that's our perhaps oldest form of traditional spirituality or worship, if you will. And that's a healing society. That's our medicine society, where we do healing. And we have active Madewin lodges still in our territory. I know of one at Panema, one at Cass Lake, one at Mille Lacs, one at Ojibwe, one at St. Croix, one at Bad River, one at Lac de Flambeau. So we got lots of Madewin lodges that are still in operation. And the thing about Ojibwe ceremony is 100% of the public speaking in those ceremonies, it's required to be in Ojibwe. So that's the great risk and the weight we all carry as kids that we grew up in this way of life, is our drums won't be used anymore. if we lose our language. We can't. We don't know how to use those drums in English. Our healing lodges, our Madewin lodges have to be run in our language. And those lodges will cease to exist if we lose our language. So those of us who are from the area that grow up with that sort of mindset, we got that pressure on our shoulders as well, right? Our funeral doings have to be conducted in our language. Our naming ceremonies have to be conducted in our language. So if we lose our language, we lose touch with all this other spiritual lifestyle, which makes it all the more urgent, the work that we're doing. So as I traveled around, I got sucked into more and more of that, and that really transforms your life. I tell language learners, if you're serious about this, it really is a lifestyle change. Like your life's going to change. The people around you are going to change. Stuff that used to matter before doesn't really matter anymore. There's all this new stuff that matters now, and it's a real rewarding way of life and a real sort of healthy way of life. We talk about all the dysfunction and social problems that plague our communities. Every one of our communities, we got these issues, we got these problems. But I was telling Jay and the others on the call last time that I don't know of any people involved in this work that suffer, that are plagued by those same social problems and the same dysfunction. Everybody I know who's engaged in this work and who has made it their life, they got real healthy lives, they got real healthy families, and people are doing good. Not that it'll make you perfect and you won't have problems. Like, no, everybody's going to have problems, but a lot of the substance abuse stuff, a lot of the addiction stuff that really rips our communities apart. You don't really see that in our language movement. There's no place for it, really. It doesn't fit. So I tell people, you'll watch a lot less Netflix or Hulu or whatever if you get into this language track, as many of you probably already know from your own language work. So I'm gonna start wrapping up just so we get a little time for questions. But Matthew Bell, he was on the call last time, and he wanted me to speak a little bit about the kids, right, and what language does for our kids, and it really transforms them. When you see the kids that come through our school, they carry this poise and this confidence about them that I've never seen before with Anishinaabe children. And what I mean by that is if I had one of those little sixth graders right here, right now, I could give them a little pinch of tobacco, pull them into the camera, and they could talk about whatever I want them to talk about, right? In Ojibwe, in front of all you guys, or in English. Whereas if I was a sixth grader, there's nobody in no way in heck you would have got me to talk in front of anybody when I was in sixth grade. So there's something about our language that sort of wakes up our children and makes them proud, right? It's an empowering thing to have a little Anishinaabe kid that can speak their language. And so it does something for them. And also, academically, it does something for them. So I always let people know that our kids that are taught in a monolingual setting, there's a little bit of a lag period, right, when it comes to testing, because they don't receive their instruction in English as far as math and science and reading goes. It's all in Ojibwe. So when they first start taking standardized tests, right, and they're compared with their peers, well, it shows them a little lower on the scoring marks. Well, by the time they hit sixth grade, they exceed their monolingual counterparts on those tests, right? And they still haven't had the same instruction in English that their monolingual counterparts have. So there's some real academic benefits, and what do you call or what defines academic benefits? What defines academic success? Most of us, we don't like to adopt, sort of colonizer measures of success. So, locally as Anishinaabe educators, we have our own definitions of that. Do they know their stories? Do they know their songs? Do they know where they're from? Do they know where we come from? Do they know who we are? Do they know where we're going? Usually comes into play a little more earlier than the test scores. But what I always let parents and other educators know is academic success from a Western standpoint, that's an outcome of what we're doing with our kids here. It's not the goal. The goal is language preservation. The goal is language survival. That's the goal. Academic success comes with that, and however you want to measure that. So one last point I want to make before I take any questions. Yeah, another thing Matthew asked is if I talk about the mindset, right, of being a Ojibwe user, an Ojibwe speaker, as opposed to English. And there's a lot, right? There's a lot that's different. When the easiest way to explain it is it's almost the polar opposite of mainstream American cultural norms. So if we were all to have a meeting right now and we were all to sit at the table right now, all of us on this call around a big long table having a meeting, somebody's going to chime in and they're going to be the one that dominates it, right? They're going to be the know-it-all. They're the ones that use all the buzzwords, and that's a sort of feature of modern American culture, that if you're well-versed, if you're educated, then you can talk the most and you can use the fanciest words. You're the sort of expert, right? Well, in Ojibwe, it's the exact opposite. So in Ojibwe, in order to be a profound Ojibwe speaker, means you can belittle yourself. And we do that at an exaggerating degree, like when we talk about ourselves, any of our possessions, we belittle it. We make ourselves out to be these pitiful, pitiful creatures, because that's the spiritual mindset. We are the most pitiful life form that was put here on earth, despite what we think about ourselves now. Our belief is everything in creation was put here before we were put here. So we rely on everything that came before us for our own simple way of life. Well, nothing that was put here before us relies on us. Everything that was put here before us, all of our four-legged relatives, all the birds, all the fish, all the trees, everything we're related to in nature, would be just fine without us. Would probably even be better off without us, because of all the damage we do to our environment. So that's the perspective that you shift into when you learn a language like Ojibwe. When you learn to speak a language like Ojibwe, you don't sound like a Euro-American. You don't sound like a mainstream American when you talk Ojibwe. Otherwise, your Ojibwe will sound really funny if you try to talk like the dominant guy at the meeting or the dominant gal at the meeting. So it's an opposite kind of thing, right? And the ideal creature culturally, the ideal creature that we call Anishinaabe is the sort of character ideal that we all aspire to be like, right? Somebody that's in balance and harmony with all of creation. And of course, it's sort of an unrealistic ideal. Nobody's perfect, and we're bound to hurt someone. We're bound to hurt something. But as long as we have that sort of cultural ideal, that cultural model to sort of strive for, it keeps that cohesion. It keeps us moving to be good to one another, to take care of things, to concern ourselves with our environment, especially if we're a harvest people. So we rely on the rice around here. The rice is everything around here. In the springtime, it's the sugar and the maple sugar and the fish, right? So we've always been that way. We've always lived right next to water. So just about all of our Ojibwe communities we're right next to a significant body of water, which is why our people settled there. And most of our communities are named after that body of water. So really, really different way of seeing the world. And the longer you stick with it, and the better you get at it, the more different the world looks, and the less petty you'll worry about things. Your issues, your problems, they become a little more petty in the sort of grand scheme of the world and the Anishinaabe universe. So that's just a little bit about that. I tell non-Indian educators that language is a tool for communication. That's all it is, right? When you remove all the sentimental attachment and everything, all language is a tool for communication. And that's what your linguists, that's what your trained experts will tell you, right? Well, for us as Indigenous people, we got this compounded sort of pressure where our language is a tool for spiritual communication as well, right? So as I mentioned before, with the lodges requiring the use of our language, the Big Drum Society requiring the use of our language, well, it's not just a tool for day-to-day one-on-one communication, but we got this other sort of added pressure with the spiritual component. They say when a language fails to meet the needs of its speakers or its users, then they shift to a new one. When the tool doesn't work anymore, they shift to a new one. So our shift as Indigenous peoples here in North America was a forced shift, right? Our languages didn't stop working for. We were forced to use a new language, and with that, some of our traditional indigenous languages were left by the wayside. So I think you guys kind of get my drift here. I just want to, you know, colonization and decolonization, that always brings up red flags and gets everybody to feel some kind of way. But I think, you know, you have to realize where you're at in your, with yourself, with your community, with your learners, with your kids. Because they're the Hawaiians, you know, if you ever get a chance to listen to the Hawaiians, they break this down, the stages or the phases of decolonization. And I know one of those stages is what they call mourning, right? Where you're mourning the loss of everything that was done to you, right? And everything that your people lost, whether it's language, culture, songs, you know, whatever. That's a period that we go through, mourning. And we have to go through that period before we can get to the sort of reclamation period. And a lot of our relatives, unfortunately, in many communities, it hasn't even dawned on them yet, right? It hasn't even dawned on them how much we've lost. One of our elders around here says, you know, we sit around and we wipe each other's tears and we cry around about everything we lost. But when we take a minute to look around and see what we still have, that's more incredible, right? That's more incredible that despite what we were put through, despite the horrific sort of shared experience we've had, we still have a language, we still have a way of life, we still have all this harvest stuff. And that's incredible, you know, from a revitalization standpoint. So yeah, so there's lots of different perspectives and versions of decolonizing ourselves. But I think I'll open it up for questions. I'll leave my email here on the slide if anybody ever wanted to reach out via email. That's my email address. And I suppose I can cut it off here and take questions if anybody has any questions related to this or language learning, Ojibwe specific or whatever. Oh, that's an L there. I don't know if that's an L or a 1. LCO.edu. There you go. Any questions? I put you guys to sleep. Everybody's sleeping.
You can all unmute yourselves, and you can also start your video if you want to jump in. And I see Jay raised his hand.
Yeah, all I wanted to do was just say that same thing. If there's something on your mind that you would like to ask, I think it's important that you know, as language educators, language activists, at your disposal in front of you, and this is the power of digital technology. You have, in my opinion, one of the premier L2s anywhere in the globe at your disposal. And there's probably a question that you're formulating, and I would encourage you to ask it. I mean, just ask. And I think this could be a first in a series, in that language revitalization, realistically, it takes a long time. So somebody ask a question, pretty please. Wilford Nistas. Oh, Wilford, you want to ask a question? So if we can get him to unmute, or maybe you could just chat the question in the box. But go ahead and ask somebody.
I'll go.
Good.
Okay, this is Carrie White Antelope Nehi say, Northern Arapaho. I'm teaching first grade at the Wyoming Indian Elementary School, K through 5. I just teach only their first grade dual language, so I'm teaching them the Northern Arapaho language. So that was a really good presentation. One of the questions I wanted to ask, I was so amazed that the 8th graders got to graduate with their language, that group of children. So did they start from preschool or daycare on up?
Yep.
And
So
you-
that particular class, they started at age 3. So the Wadukadaring Immersion School used to have a pre-K program that was for 3 and 4-year-olds. And then they lost the grant. I don't know what happened with the funding, but the grant fell off, and they had to close down the pre-K arm. So now kids are starting there in kindergarten. But a couple of my kids were old enough to get in on that pre-K offering. One thing they'll tell you in the research as far as immersion goes is you got to get your kids to 8th grade if you want it solidified, right? If they're going to actually retain it for their life. Like say you only go to 4th grade and then they transition to mainstream English speaking schools, well, there's a good chance they're going to lose. They're going to forget a lot of what they retained in those early years. So all the Hawaiians, right, all the Maoris, they were all telling us, you got to get them through 8th grade. You got to get them through 8th grade, get them to high school. And that's when they're going to start blowing your mind with the stuff they do with the language. So I see that now. And that particular group that I showed on the slide, they started to come up with their own little slang and their own little ways of saying stuff. And that's cool. That's real language revival.
Mhm.
Like if anybody has teenagers out there, your teenagers don't talk like you.
Yeah.
And nobody worries.
Okay.
Nobody worries about it, right? Because English is safe. But when it comes to our indigenous languages, I was telling somebody that I said, yeah, man, they got their own little slang and their own little twang,
Mhm.
saying
Mhm.
stuff, and they're like, "Well, aren't you worried about that? Don't you want them to talk like the elders?" I said, "No, man, real healthy language revitalization revolves
Mhm.
taking ownership, and
Yes.
it all involves some kind of level of language change. Like we freak out as indigenous people, like, no, our culture can't change, no, our language can't change. It always has been. It always has been changing,
Mhm.
no matter what you feel or believe, and it has to, right? It has to. Nobody stays stagnant. One of my professors one time told me, he says, everything that stops changing starts dying.
Mm.
I said, wow, because I was one of the ones that if I found out a word in an old book from the 1800s and it was pronounced different than how it was now, then I was one of those guys that's like, oh, stop the show, we're saying it wrong. And I was naive. I had to realize, like, oh man, language changes, and that's
Okay.
okay. That's
So
okay.
one more question before I go back to class. What about during the summer? You're like, for us, we're teaching our language through the school year, and then some of them don't retain it.
Yeah,
So what do you guys do during the summer?
Yeah, I think for there's a lot of camps, there's a lot of camps in our region. Summer is a good time to visit if anybody was interested in visiting Ojibwe camps. There's, adult camps, there's kid camps. Almost every reservation will have camps. So that's one option. Our local school system has summer school, so I think there's a 6-week session where our immersion kids can go to summer school for 6 weeks with their immersion teachers. But yeah, I think it's a real issue. I mean, I even get rusty going from Friday to Monday,
Yeah.
if I don't have anybody to talk to over the weekend, maybe I'm on travel or something. By the time I get around back in the community, I feel kind of rusty just being out of it for a couple of days. So I can definitely relate to the kids.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Miigwech, thank you.
There are a few questions in chat. One of them is, how are the immersion classes set up at the high school level when they are supposed to move into other classes?
Right on. So, yep. I think the older they go, so I haven't been too involved with the high school coordination or the planning, but I know when I was at the immersion school full time, there was a sort of formula they were shooting for, right? So by the time they get to 8th grade, I want to say it's 80-20, which would be 80% Ojibwe instruction, 20% English instruction. And that 20% was just English class. English as a class, right? So they take English class. But everything else, science, math, everything was delivered in Ojibwe. What I think the plan is for 9th grade and beyond, they go to a 60-40. So 60% of the day is Ojibwe medium, right? Ojibwe immersion, and then 40% is English. And then they start to work with math and science just for the purposes of like college placement and testing and stuff. So that's the model that you'll see in other more successful, bigger programs like in Hawaii and New Zealand, where the target language is still the language of communication, right? It's still what people use in the hallway, still what people use on the playground or social interaction. But when it comes to content specific and subjects that they teach, then they'll start to incorporate more English the older the kids get. So by the time they graduate high school, they know what a decimal is, right? Whereas before it was a dukabiagan. That's what they knew decimal as. So sometimes if you take a kid out of our immersion school, maybe 7th grade, and you transfer them out to a English speaking public school, the teachers in the public school are super concerned, right? He doesn't even know what a decimal is. And he knows what a dukabiagan is. He just hasn't associated that with the English name for it. He hasn't had a need to, right? So yeah, that's the, as far as I understand, as far as I was in the loop, that's the plan for high school programming, is that they start to incorporate more English with, maybe content heavy sort of stuff.
Thank you. That was from Leah Whitford in Browning. And
Cool.
are there simple short format tools that can be integrated into home life so parents and kids can learn at the same time?
Yeah, right on. So we just launched Rosetta Stone. And everybody knows Rosetta Stone, right? They're a powerhouse in language learning software apps, so you can get it on your phone. So Rosetta Stone Ojibwe, if you were to just Google that, it's sponsored by Anishinaabemowin, which is a program out of the Mille Lacs Band. So that if you just Google Rosetta Stone Ojibwe, it'll bring up this link, Anishinaabemowin. Click on that, that'll show you how much it costs. It'll have little mock sort of demo for you to see what it's like. But basically it's a app-based, web-based language learning software. So you got to talk into it, you got to watch videos, you get little quizzes on it, you learn vocab. It's pretty cool, man. And I'm one of the editors behind the scenes, so we do a lot of the spell checking on the back end to make sure what they're putting out is accurate. And then my son is one of the actors on there, and then my niece is one of the actresses on there. So we have to go over there. It's through the Mille Lacs Band, which is almost 3 hours away from here, but we go over there a few times a year for filming. So far they've released 2 levels, 1 and 2, and they just got done recording level 3, and then next summer they record level 4. So they're coming out with 6 levels have been already bought and paid for by the Mille Lacs Band. So it's going to be the easiest way and most accessible way for anybody. And if you got 20 minutes to scroll on Facebook or Instagram, you'll have 20 minutes to scroll through Rosetta Stone. But that's the easiest, most accessible way from anywhere in the world. Last I checked, there was like 11 different countries accounted for people subscribing to Rosetta Stone, thousands of users. I think they had 22,000 hits on the first day it went public. So that's a really, really cool one, big investment. What else is there? That Birch Bark Books that I mentioned, they got a lot of children's books, a lot of bilingual stuff that's written in Ojibwe and English, a lot of stuff that's just written in Ojibwe. Those old phrase books I pointed out through Birch Bark Books, there's one called Let's Speak Ojibwe at Home. And that one's got like really cool phrase level stuff, like put the eggs on the counter, or, like navigated. Did you sweep the floor yet? Clean the bathroom, and doing your chores in Ojibwe, stuff like that. That one's called Let's Speak Ojibwe at Home, and I know they have that at Birch Bark Books. Well, all right, guys, I gotta go get some lunch. I'm sure you're bucket A too, but keep in touch. If anybody's interested in Ojibwe, Ojibwe country, I can get you connected pretty good, no matter what your level is or interest, or if you have, non-Ojibwe specific questions, I can try my best to help, whether it's language teaching, language learning, whatever, wild rice recipes. Hey. All right.
Dr. McGee, had one last question.
Who?
Is your preference for your stir fry with your wild rice, is it moose or is it elk?
Man, neither. It's deer meat. So
Yay!
moose haven't been around here in a while. We got to go about 2 hours up by Fond du Lac. That's the closest place you'll find moose hunting locally. And then they just reintroduced the elk herd about 20 miles north of here. And so one time a year, our band will get a seasonal sort of ceremonial permit to harvest one elk. So one of my uncles shot it a couple years ago. There's one a year they get. So he shot the elk, and we had a big feast and got to taste elk meat again. But deer is the popular one around here. We hunt a lot of deer, so I like
Yeah.
my stir fries deer meat, wild rice, and mashed potatoes, all fried up in bacon grease. Wow.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right, everybody. It's lunchtime. I love you guys, but I gotta eat. Okay.
Oh, wait, big wage.
Kitam Hino. Thank everybody for attending. Dr. McGeezy, he offered up his information. Contact him. Got a question. I'm sure he'll help you with your strategies. So Kitam Hino. Thank you very much.